what an utterly bizarre event that just was. The Prime Minister held a press conference in order to lecture the House of Lords on their need to pass the Rwanda bill. He took an opportunity a moment after a piece of legislation, it's quite high profile, was sort of about a third of the way through its parliamentary process, to lecture the other chamber about their need to get on and put it into law and hurry up. And you were sort of slightly baffled as to why he would do that in a press conference. The Prime Minister has had the spectre of 2 days of divisions in his party, 2 days of rebellions by his MPs as they try to find their way to the best possible legislation to try and get these flights to Rwanda up. And then the Prime Minister today has sort of opened up a new front against the House of Lords, as if speaking from behind the lectern from Downing Street is going to make the blindest bit of difference to what the House of Lords does. I can't see that it would. A bit of me wonders what on earth they thought the headline would be out of that press conference, because as far as I can tell, the most notable thing that happened in that press conference was that 2 journalists asked, can you guarantee that there will be flights before the election? And in all of the blizzard of words that followed about it being his priority and all the rest of it, the Prime Minister couldn't say yes. And you sort of get a sense of how Rishi Sunak seems sort of digging deeper and deeper and deeper into this issue. Like, if you just pull the camera back a moment, Wilf, we've had a poll today suggesting that after all of this focus on the issue of small boats and the sort of lack of resolution, that the party to the right of the Conservative Party, the Reform UK, is kind of going up in the polls. And here we have a moment where the Prime Minister is standing up and making quite clear that he is having to plead with an entire chamber of our Parliament to get on and pass the bill that he had quite a difficult time getting through the Commons. That isn't a story of delivering. It is not the story of solving problems. It's a story of a sort of Prime Minister desperately imploring a group of people outside his control to do something he'd rather like. I am really surprised that the Prime Minister didn't use this moment maybe to try and change the topic or to paint a success story on something else, given it is, after all, an election year. Instead, he took us down an enormous rabbit hole to a sort of constitutionally complex situation where he's imploring, rather like Theresa May did kind of rather pointlessly before, to try and beg the House of Lords to do something. In the end, things will probably go his way in the House of Lords, but sort of standing up today and talking about and sort of blaming them in advance for failing to do so, it seemed like an incredibly weird thing to want to do.
It's so interesting, Sam. Of course, we also need to now see if the polls change after the law passed its third reading. I accept
but the law hasn't been introduced. This is the problem.
No, I know. I accept that that's unlikely to make a huge difference. In terms of your point about trying to talk about other topics, we got a kind of glimpse in the middle there, or about 2/3 of the way through, where he started talking about we're the party that cares about immigration, Labour aren't. And then he talked about tax cuts a little bit and again brought up this Labour 28 billion figure. I mean, did we get a glimpse there of the 2 policy differences that he will focus on in an election campaign? And the reason I raised that is the question of whether they will still be as clear a set of differences the longer he waits. And I get that the polls are terrible, and to call an election at this point looks highly unlikely. But again, I just wonder if your latest thinking has changed as to when an election might be likely?
I mean, undoubtedly, you heard there the 2 other things that the Conservative Party is sort of clinging on to, the sort of centrepieces of what exists, of what we know of their election campaign. One is to highlight the differences, the so-called £28 billion borrowing by Labour to put into green investment, which, by the way, Labour in the process of changing and might no longer be 28 billion a year, might even be just 28 billion over a parliament, paid for by borrowing. They're quite, explicit about that, for the decarbonising the energy grid and things like that. The Tories think that is a big dividing line with the Labour Party. It might be less of a big dividing line pretty soon. And then he talks about tax cuts, and we've got a budget on March the 6th. And actually, that could be a bigger dividing line before long, because if he does big tax cuts, then, that will be a big move. But for everything we have seen, other than inheritance tax, the Labour Party will probably approve and say that they would keep those tax cuts. So you've got a Prime Minister sort of feeling his way when it comes to trying to when it comes to trying to find those moments of difference. Immigration is undoubtedly the biggest difference between Labour and the Conservatives, because Labour are up front. This is an area they want to fight on. They would scrap the Rwanda plan even if it was working. Rishi Sunak says you have to have a deterrent. But taking us down this rabbit hole at a point where a bill is halfway through a parliamentary process and sort of begging the other chamber to get on and do it. I mean, he's not saying he's going to abolish the House of Lords if it finishes. David Cameron comes from there, But so, what was the point, other than to actually reveal his hand that he cannot say there will be flights to Rwanda before the election?